Good afternoon and welcome to this month Amplifying Lion Voices webinar. We're glad that you are here to be participating in this month webinar with our speaker. If you can, please, on the chat, we'll welcome everyone and we would like you to introduce yourself so we know where you're coming from. Just write it on the chat so speaker and I will know who you are. Please just share your name, role, or whatever you want to share so we know that you are part of this attending. So we have an idea. At the end, as we have done in the past, we will allow you to have any question that you want from the speaker, from our special speaker today. And we'll have available, you will be able to have those questions at the end. So welcome again. My name is Dr. Raffy Luquis. I'm serving as the director of JEDI, Justice, Equity, Inclusion, Diversity, and Belonging within the Penn State Clinical Translation Science Institute. I'm also the interim school director for the behavioral science education at Penn State Harrisburg. Before we start this session, we'd like to read the acknowledgement of land. The Pennsylvania State University campuses are located on the regional homeland of the Erie, Hanaunoseha, Lenape, Monongahela, Shawnee, Susquehannock, Wasahi nations. As a land constitution, we acknowledge and honor the tradition and caretakers on this land and strive to understand and model the responsible stewardship. We also acknowledge the longest history of this land and our place in that history. Also, as we're beginning to start celebrating the Hispanic Heritage Month, beginning on a couple of days on 9/15 to 10/15, let us reflect and celebrate the important role that Hispanic and Latinos have played in our shared history. As many of you know, Amplifying Lion Voices is a quarterly seminar series to amplify underrepresented voices in the health research that involve areas of diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. As we refer to diversity, we refer to as a university where demographic composition, military, veteran status, economic background, language, geography, generations, neurodiversity, and other identities are represented on the human complexity of our state, nation, and global constituency. Diversity fosters innovation and research, knowledge, production, and classroom learning, greater creativity in decision-making, and better preparation of students for work and citizenship in an increasing global society. So our hope is that the Amplifying Lion Voices sessions promote dialogue and encourage innovation collaboration across diverse researchers, faculty, staff, and students at Penn State, and also as part of the CTSI. We also want to acknowledge the contribution of the SHARE program for the promoting engagement across Penn State, spanning many disciplines, and the overall goal of enhancing wellness and reducing health disparities. Today, we have the honor to welcome Lori Francis. I think I've known Lori, I don't know how many years now. It's probably been over 20 years. And I think this might be the first time we really sit down and have a conversation we have a lot of conversation in different settings, different time, but not something like this that we're going to engage today. So welcome Lori to this session. Dr. Lori Francis is a professor in behavioral health in the College of Health and Human Development at University Park. Her research focuses on individual, families, communities, factors that contribute to the risk and resiliency from health disparities in children and families from households that experience poverty. Her current projects focus on understanding the role of stress and adversities on problematic eating behaviors and obesity in youth, and community engagement research project focused on nutrition, education, obesity prevention, and stress coping in preschool settings and with adults and families who have experienced poverty and housing insecurities. A quick background, she's a child of immigrant parents. She's originally from New York and saw firsthand the impact of poverty and adversity of health opportunities. Being immersed in various cultures in New York City, melting pot, gave her appreciation for the role of culture in individual health behaviors and for the way in which one's zip codes can be a major determinant of health disparities. So again, welcome, Lori, to our panel today.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
So we'll start this section. We'll start with the first question, just simple. And you can say as much you want, as little you want. Tell us a little bit about you, professionally, personally, and professionally. And now you got to be who are you today?
Yeah, as little as I want or as much as I want. So, well, I've been here for a very long time. I've been here for 27 years. Like you said, I'm originally from New York. I'm one of those weird people who knew exactly what they wanted to do as an undergrad. I took a class in my junior year with a wonderful professor. He was one of the leaders in pediatric obesity research. And I remember thinking about people who do research and thinking they were so weird and who would just want to like work with statistics and numbers. And I took his class and I was like, I want to work with statistics and numbers. I fell in love with research. I've always loved children, always knew I wanted to work with children. I thought I wanted to be a pediatrician until organic chemistry took me out and I decided that was no longer my calling in life. But I took this class in health psychology, fell in love with the like statistical methods, really thinking about clinical designs, clinical trials, and understanding why they work and why they don't work. And from there, again, when I think about how stars align for people, my advisor just made a phone call to someone who was working here at Penn State, who was also doing this work, and said, you know, there's this young girl who's interested in childhood obesity research. For some reason, she's in love with research. You should take her. And that led me here. So when I think about like my own upbringing and my own background and sort of who I am, like you said, I'm a child of Jamaican immigrants. I'm a first generation Jamaican, we like to call ourselves.
Mhm.
And, you know, I've always been really interested in people who are under-resourced, underprivileged, whether it was people in my family or people in the neighborhoods I was growing up in, especially in Brooklyn. My family moved out to Long Island a little later in life. But I've always been just intrigued with how people manage to become resourceful, you know, in the face of very low resources. So I think there's a lot of that we can kind of get through in our conversation, who like that shapes who I am today. So
Great. So how do you went about getting involved in the area of research you're doing right now? I mean, how do you start it? Where did that start from? How do you say, oh, okay, I'm just going to go on obesity or something else? I mean, how do you start thinking about how do you get here? You know, what was that lead you to the point you're doing today?
yeah, so again, in that health psych class, I approached the professor, and I will say, so the clinical trials we were looking at were not just focused on obesity. He was an obesity researcher, but I thought about smoking research. I remember thinking about cancer research, and I just approached him one day and asked if I could work in his lab to learn more about the research he was working on. Um, I got to work on someone's dissertation study, collecting their data. And again, like just my interaction with him and kind of falling in love with the work he was doing led me to this opportunity with my grad school advisor, who was also a pediatric obesity researcher. And I started in a very strange place, just understanding why kids eat what they eat and how parents kind of influence children's eating behaviors. And I have certainly evolved from there, very much still interested in early childhood and obesity, but very much more thinking about community experiences, early childhood family experiences, and what that means for behaviors that are developed long term. So again, I'm one of these weird people who kind of stuck with the same area. I've had some ups and downs in terms of the pathway to where I am today, but still very much interested in pediatric health, a focus on health disparities and populations, particularly those who have experienced poverty, but still very much childhood obesity, like I was when, I started.
So did you know that was kind of your academic background and so on? If there's any personal area that's really got you to that area of obesity and families and all that?
I wish I could say yes, but no. I have had no personal experiences in my life that had made me want to study childhood obesity. Really, it just kind of fell on me in college and I stuck with it. I can certainly look back and now think about, you know, health disparities and the things I'm interested in now, that my experience as a child of an immigrant, certainly seeing how my parents struggled to navigate the healthcare system, to even navigate school for us, you know, because of the I would say the demands on their time, they didn't have a lot of time to be involved. We still managed to eat home cooked meals every single day. So I think there are aspects of my upbringing and understanding, seeing poverty firsthand, seeing what it's like to be a child of immigrants, right, who are trying to navigate, life for their kids and prioritizing family in a system that is constantly beating them down. And that really kind of shaped my interest in working with families experiencing poverty.
Okay. So I'm going to move on to something a little bit different. So what challenges have you encountered when working with diverse populations, when doing the kind of research that you do, from the beginning to where you're now, anything you want to share with people?
Yeah. So I would say, the major challenge that I experience is, we approach families, we try to talk about coming out to meetings so we can talk about eating healthy and feeding children healthy foods. And not to say that that's not a priority for families. Every family, every parent wants their child to eat well. It's just not their family priority, right? So working with families experiencing poverty, there are so many other things that are immediate concerns, like making sure there's even a meal to feed their children, or making sure that their lights are going to stay on, right? That trying to address them with research questions and this research study that to me seems like the best study in the whole world, it's hardly a priority. So I think I experienced what many people experience in terms of recruiting families, helping families prioritize the work. So once we recruit them, keeping them in the study. And for me, as someone who's interested in intervention, we have a lot of disappointment, I'll say that. And that's no surprise. Folks who are doing intervention work, there are some successes, but we have people who are dropping out of studies, or again, not completing all aspects of the study. So that's certainly one of the challenges that I face, especially with the families that I deal with in terms of families experiencing poverty.
So I guess, as you think about your own research on the social determinant of health and all these other factors that impact health and the well-being of people, I guess you have to go beyond just thinking about, what they're eating or the food they are. We have to think about the whole complexity of factors that impact this individual's life, daily life. And then
Absolutely.
we come as a researcher and say, hey, I would like you to be in my research. And they're like, what is that? And why would I be on it?
Exactly, exactly. And I will say, so over the past few years, I, have these two lines of research, one that's very lab-based, very basic science. And then I have my applied work. And I love that I've been able to marry the two. And a lot of the work that I've done in the lab, sort of basic science, has informed the interventions I've designed. And I will say that having that community piece does make me appreciate much more the numbers that we see on paper, and to know that there are faces behind the data and people and lives behind the data. And because of that, I do have this appreciation for the fact that it doesn't matter how rigorous my study design is, like people still have life to live, and those will always be their priorities, over ours. And absolutely all the other structural determinants that kind of take precedence over my research and my recruitment. Absolutely.
And I think that's a good point to make to people who are maybe just beginning their research career and they're thinking, oh, I just go out there and do my research and collect data. And it's just that simple. It is not. You're right. That's a good point to think about. As a researcher, we have to go beyond just the question that we ask, and we have to really understand their dynamics that they have going through, and how do we get the people. And I think it's a good point you made, which is important, is that the fact that is there's people behind those numbers.
Absolutely. And I think we forget that when we, like, if we think about our training, even for me, no one ever said that to me. No one ever said, oh, there are people and children and families behind all the data. We're trained to think about collecting good data and what are the data telling us, and then interpreting that data and then putting it out for scientists to read. In most cases, I don't want to generalize to everyone. Some of us actually do work that impacts communities and people, but seldom do we think about the people, behind those numbers and those data. So, yeah.
So let's flip that coin. So what are some of the success stories that you can share when working with diverse population, when working in the research you have done with different families, different people, children, all of that? What kind of those things that you're like, wow, this is finally, this is something good out of it?
Yeah. So one thing that I love is, like, my work is fun, right? I get to hang out with kids, and especially like preschoolers who I absolutely love. feeding them different foods, seeing what they'll eat, and I do appreciate the translational value of my work where, at the end of the day, I really do feel like we're helping people. I do think that later in my career and having more experiences working in communities, there have been wonderful successes with, community organizations or agencies who have really bought into the work that we're doing. We have some agencies who've institutionalized some of our intervention programs or nutrition education programs. And I will say, like, I don't feel that anyone can ever say, well, the work you're doing is not important. I'm lucky enough to be in a field where, whether you're talking about childhood obesity or eating behavior or, access to food, no one can say that that's not a priority. So I feel like the families that I've interacted with over the years, the agencies, community agencies that are my partners, I feel like there has been a lot of success just in building those partnerships, building trust. And because of that trust, it actually helps to improve the work that I do in the lab, right? So this community lab piece is huge and has been very successful for me.
And I think you make a point about the translation part of it. Can you elaborate on that? I mean, how do you see that real practice of it? How do you see that real make a difference in the communities based on your research?
Well, I mean, so this kind of gets at, something we may talk about later, but I have spent a lot of time doing outreach and education without really asking for much research in return. So I am a researcher. I do not have an extension appointment. So like my success is determined by the amount of grants I bring in, the amount of papers that I publish. And as you know, intervention work is really hard. It takes a long, long time to develop those partnerships, to develop those relationships. But we are at this place where, we have been doing this work that is not research based. So a lot of what we hear are stories from teachers, teachers who are telling us, parents are coming in and telling them that their kids could identify foods in the grocery store. We have teachers every single year. I'll give a little background. So some of the work we're doing in preschools is introducing kids to new fruits and vegetables. And we're really trying to address picky eating so that downstream, hopefully we can impact children's willingness to try new fruits and vegetables, leaning more towards vegetables and improving overall dietary patterns. So we are hearing these stories all the time about how much our project is changing children's willingness to try new foods, how other kids are hearing those kids talk about how much they like these very strange foods that we're feeding them. So we hear a lot of those successes. And certainly, again, sort of how that translates to what's going on at home. Parents who are now buying those fruits and vegetables for children because they're asking for them because they were introduced to them in the classroom through our project. So those are the stories that I kind of take home. We haven't necessarily materialized the data to kind of back that anecdote. We're collecting this data now. And we do certainly have some survey data that's very basic, but a lot of this is based on just these partnerships that help me to develop these relationships that really I'm not asking for much in return in terms of research and data.
Well, I mean, that's amazing to know. That's good to know. I bet that's the kind of things that make you say, wow, I made an impact, even though that wasn't as you're right, I don't have the data to show that, but it's making an impact, even though it might not be quantifiable, but it's there. The way that it's making some kind of a difference in these people's lives. That's great just to have that sense of like, all these years of work finally it's kind of paying off. Some of it is paying off.
Absolutely.
So let's move a little bit a different area. As we have talked to some of the other people that we have done in this series, is the idea of when you come from an underrepresented background, whichever that underrepresented background might be, sometimes that presents some challenges when it comes to your career, when it comes to the kind of thing that you would like to achieve, especially at a university like Penn State University and so on. So what kind of challenge have you encountered, from that point of view, as being somebody coming from an underrepresented background, maybe that didn't have the same opportunities, or maybe didn't have the same basics, or maybe whatever it was that creates some of those barriers for you to really achieve everything you have achieved right now?
Yeah. So I'll kind of think about that in two ways, sort of professional challenges and then personal challenges. So, professional challenges, I started here again with an interest in poverty, but very much wanting to be a minority researcher who studies minority populations, and poverty, poverty samples, those are certainly under-resourced, underprivileged samples. But I really wanted to impact minority families. And if you know anything about the demographics of Center County, where I live in State College, it is not very diverse, So very early on, I was going back and forth to Harrisburg, York, and Lancaster. So anywhere from an hour and a half to 2 hours away twice a week when I was an assistant professor trying to get tenure, just to make sure that I was trying to interact with and build relationships with minority communities and agencies in minority communities. You can sustain that for only so long. I didn't have any funding that would help me to do that. I couldn't, hire a staff in those communities. So I would say that, certainly this disconnect between my geography and the work, the folks I wanted to be working with and the populations I wanted to work with, that was a huge challenge for me. I think another professional challenge is just like, I don't want to say this weird, but just not seeing enough of me in the spaces that I was in. I was most often one of a few, or sometimes the only Black woman, Black person in general in the room. And not to say that I'm not used to that, kind of that has been my experience through much of my undergrad, certainly my grad program. But that's always going to be a challenge when you feel like you just don't see enough of people who look like you in your professional spaces. Personal challenges. As a Jamaican, I love Jamaican food and I can make Jamaican food, right? But living here in college, so that's a professional challenge. And it's also a personal challenge where, I don't smell the smells that I'm used to. I don't see the people, the voices, the culture that I really miss. And I talked about the melting pot in New York. It wasn't just Jamaican culture. I heard every culture. You can hear, people speaking different languages. There are different restaurants, different cultural celebrations that were free that you could attend. And there's a lot of that culture that certainly does not exist here in Pennsylvania, or I shouldn't say in Pennsylvania, but here in State College, that has certainly been a personal challenge for me.
And so, yeah, I think I can relate to some of the things you say. Locally, I'm in central Pennsylvania, down in Hattiesburg, so I have a little bit more access to more diverse cooking and more diverse cultures and restaurants and so on. But but it's right. Sometimes you feel like, for example, when I was in Arkansas as a student, I was in the middle of nowhere, Arkansas. I felt the same way. There was nothing there that I could really tie myself to. There was nothing that I could identify with. There was nothing. I was one Puerto Rican at Whole University of Arkansas at the time. And so you feel it's like kind of isolated, you feel alone sometimes. And it doesn't matter how many other connections you have, you still feel that sense of, well, I'm just one out of, one of just many. And it's hard to connect. So how do you go about, what kind of things you help you through the years to kind of overcome some of those barriers and some of the challenges that then lead you to some of the successes that you have able to achieve?
Yeah. Well, so let me start by saying, despite all that complaining I just did, 27 years. So clearly it has not been so bad that I have wanted to leave. I can't say I haven't wanted to leave, but I'm still here after 27 years. I got here in grad school. I will admit that I gave myself 2 years. I said, I'm just going to stop at the master's and I'm getting out of State College. Certainly that didn't happen. I saw the value in just finishing, going all the way through the PhD. But while I was here in grad school, very early on, I sought out, the different ways to find culture. One experience was a church that I pretty much spent most of my time here in State College. It was a predominantly Black church, still in existence, still going very strong. And I talk about these little enclaves. So like that experience with this small community of, it's a predominantly Black population in church, in State College, kind of made me feel like my world was more diverse than it actually was, So like in those moments, and we did a lot together, not just on a Sunday morning, but throughout the week, where you felt like you were developing a family. So it did feel like State College got smaller, a little more diverse, and felt a little more homey. So I've kept many of those relationships, certainly trying to find every cultural celebration or event that they have here in State College. And like I tell my students, I was traveling all the time. So I would go to New York, I'd hop on the Amtrak from Lewistown, head into New York City, I'd go to Philly, I'd go to Washington, D.C. And then I realize now that I was a city girl. I can say was. I have become a country girl who appreciates like the quiet calm of State College and woods and hiking. So while I will go for the weekend to the city,
Yeah.
I'm running back to the country at the end of the weekend. So there's only so much I can take anymore now that I feel like I've become a country girl. But certainly there are those little spaces and places where people can get the culture and belonging that they need. And it exists here, even in State College.
Now, some of our previous guest speaker have talked about mentors. Do you have specific people in your life that have helped you to the career, that have helped you, overcome some of those obstacles or barriers or challenges that you're like, oh yeah, there's this person or whatever that really, maybe that's the person you still in State College 27 years later.
Yeah, I mean, there are far too many to mention. I know some people think about one person who completely, changed the trajectory of their lives. I think one thing for me, especially being at this church that was predominantly Black in a town like State College, we had so many PhDs, we had a dentist, we had so many people who were very successful. And that is not something that I saw growing up, like my friends, we all kind of went to college together. So our small friend group, we were pretty successful. But in terms of our families and other people who were close to us, we did not see them pursuing higher education. So I think more than a mentor, those experiences of seeing people who were, Black and doing well, and other minority groups who were doing very well and in esteemed positions at the university changed and shifted my view of, what being diverse and successful means. And I think that also propelled me to look at State College a little differently. If there were so many people who were successful here in State College, that I could find meaning in being here, and rather than focusing on what State College didn't have, thinking about what State College could actually provide for me. That was helpful. Again, not so much propelling me in my career, but propelling me to stay here, which was good for my career. Yes.
Yeah. So, yeah, I guess one of the comments you made earlier, because I've probably been in the same boat, once in a while you're like, yeah, I'm just going to get out. I'm just going to find someplace else to go. And then somehow, just like you, I'm here 25, this is my 25 year, since I've been with Penn State, associated with Penn State, after being a student for a while. So what have, in addition to those personal connections and so on, what else have you gone through that said, you know what? I'm in the right place to be. I have the support system that I need to do my research, to do what my professional career, personal career, whatever that is, that really made me feel like this is okay to, this is kind of home. This is a good place to be.
Yeah, I mean, I have always felt incredibly supported here at Penn State. I love the department that we're in. I feel like I've always had support from my department heads in the college as well. And I think, again, feeling like my work is respected, and valued here has made me feel like unless Penn State has truly been bad to me, why would I leave? Because I'd go somewhere else, it would be the same bureaucracy, same drama, same red tape, and then I'd have to start all over. So, they're truly, again, there are some personal issues where it's just always a challenge being a minority scientist, right, in a predominantly white area. But I have always felt incredibly supported. And I think, in addition to developing friendships that there are people like me who've been here for a long time and always ask, why are we still here? And we've kind of bonded together. But yeah, I feel like the support that I felt at Penn State and the resources we have here at Penn State, I have a lot of friends at Ivy League schools that do not have the resources we have here. So I've felt no reason to leave other than to get some Jamaican food, and I can easily do that on a weekend. Yeah.
That's good to know. We almost get into the end before we open this to some of the audience questions. Over the years, especially if you were going back to yourself, I don't know, 20 years ago when you started and you said, what lessons would I have learned now that I would like to tell myself or other people that are now coming up to Penn State and thinking about, having a career at Penn State and, doing research with underrepresented communities or diverse communities or so on? What would you tell them? What kind of things would you tell them, that you have learned that you will provide a kind of an advice to them?
Yeah. So like one very early lesson I learned is, the things you're passionate about should align with the things you're good at, right? So I knew from very early on, like 7 years old, that I was going to be working with kids. I didn't know in what capacity that was in. I've worked in, senior housing facilities. I have worked in nursing homes. I have worked with teenagers and can 100% tell you, I am not made to work with teenagers. And I feel like that very early on thing that makes you say, like, I love this, I could do this for the rest of my life.
Yeah.
It really should align with what you're good at, what you're talented at, what you should be most successful at, and I say that because, especially as a child of an immigrant, my parents wanted me to be a doctor or a teacher, or nurse, right? There were 2 to 3 professions that a respectable child should, pursue.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, I became a doctor, but not the doctor that they, even to this day, still think that I am. Really, like, had I pursued what my parents wanted me to do, I wouldn't be as happy as I am today. So that's one big lesson. And I think the other thing is, like, really, it's so simple, but just like being nice and being a kind person, thinking about developing partnerships with people who you want, to promote your research, or, developing these community relationships, like just being kind it goes a very long way. Being kind to your staff, being kind to the staff in your department, right? I think being a kind person and thinking about prioritizing other people's feelings and wants and needs, sometimes above your own, can go a very long way. So yeah, I'm not sure if that's the answer you were looking for.
Yeah, whatever answer.
Yeah, that is huge.
So have you ever been a mentor to younger professionals? And what kind of things have you told them, if they're going to engage in this type of this type of career?
Yeah. So the reality, especially with the work that I'm really pursuing heavily now, just much more community engaged, and the work that's very, very slow, it's slow to churn out productivity. It's a very long time to develop these relationships. There are a lot of younger professionals who want to jump right in to that work. And whether you're a graduate student who has a very limited amount of time, and some of that time you don't have to develop some of those relationships if they're not already established by your mentor. And I would say the same thing for younger professionals who, you're on the tenure track, you have a limited amount of time to show that you can be very productive so that you can become, tenured. There are ways to diversify your portfolio, we'll call it, right? Your research portfolio, that you don't give up those passions, those things that you're really interested in. And I'm saying this from personal experience, preaching to myself, this is what I did. I never gave up on that desire to be in communities and to do this hands-on, intervention work. But I knew that had I only focused on that without the systems in place to really support me doing that work well, I never would have been as successful as I am now, right? So, and I don't say that to brag, but I had to have this other line of work that was interesting. I'm not going to say as equally as interesting to me, because I'm very passionate about the work with the communities, but it was able to keep me productive, so that I can do the community work and have much more freedom now later in my career to really focus mainly on that community work. So the advice would be, again, think about your passion, what you're excited about, and make that align with what your expertise is in. But also thinking about diversifying, but never losing sight of those things that you're really passionate about. It may be a little harder to do, and you might have to think about doing something else along the way, but really never losing sight. So I feel like I've kind of shared those, I don't know, I wouldn't want to call it words of wisdom, but just my own experiences that have helped me along the way, and also really trying to encourage people to think about the end, not where you are now, right? So if the end is to get the PhD, if the end is to get tenure, right? Think about that without worrying about all the little things that you have to do to get there, because those, hopefully that end will motivate them to deal with some of the struggles that come along the way.
So this is more a little personal. Like it would be if you would answer it now. But if you were thinking about, what's something that you feel proud of what you have accomplished? Where you came from, where you are now. What is one thing that you're like, wow, I never thought myself doing this, but I'm doing it now. So I'm definitely proud of it.
You're not gonna make me cry, not today.
No, I want.
Um, so I keep thinking about my first day, literally the first day that I was here in State College. As this girl by myself, like moving from one state to another, moving from New York here, and just not even seeing people that looked like me in the community as I was driving through. And I really did not think that I would last. I didn't think I would make it through. But I'm proud that I stuck it out. I'm proud that I found value in the program I was in. Again, that end goal of getting a PhD, getting tenure, right? Kind of moving up that process. And I never, ever would have seen myself as someone who lives on the side of a mountain in the woods. I never would have seen that with a PhD behind my name. So yeah, I'm proud of that.
So I'm gonna see if anybody in the audience have any questions for Lori. And if you have, please go ahead and you can type them on the chat. Let's see. So come on, don't be shy. If I'm sure some people have some questions, go ahead and you can type them up. But if you want to unmute yourself, I don't know if we're allowed to do that, but if not, just go ahead and type it and we can read it. I guess the other question I will have, I know as we talked before, we started this whole session, you just got back from sabbatical. So what were you working on? Just tell the people, what project were you working on that you decided, hey, I need really time to focus on this. I really need the time of a sabbatical give me to really focus on concentrating something that I want to do.
Yeah.
Especially this late in your career, you're like, oh, I've done everything. No, I'm just going to do something different. What was it that you were working on?
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly what I did, so really tried to shift gears during my sabbatical to focus more on community engaged work. So I've one community engaged project that wrapped up in 2020, 2021. It was an intervention project that we designed with the community, rolled it out in the community. It was successful. I'm kind of working, part of my sabbatical was to work on, writing up the analyses for that. But I really wanted to use my sabbatical time to shift to focus most of my work on like true community engagement, where, one of the things we did working with a current partner in Harrisburg, just this summer, we wrapped up an installation of a garden, so really starting this urban gardening project to address access to food and food insecurity. And we worked with someone who was local in the community who had a tie to the center that we were working with. And I wrote a grant for them and they got it to do more for gardening and farm to school initiatives. And I would never have had the time to do that. We were going back and forth, and shout out to my students and my staff who went back and forth to Harrisburg to do a lot of the install and planting and upkeep and developing these relationships with the partners. There's just no way if I was teaching and had, my service commitments that I could have ever done that. So I feel like we have laid the foundation during my sabbatical to really solidify this. This was an existing partnership, but not it wasn't solidified as it is now. I feel like, again, like we have given without asking for anything in return, which is really hard. And there's just no way I would have had time to do that before sabbatical, or certainly before tenure. I could not have done that. So that was my big switch, and really having this focus on community engaged research, and especially with this focus on urban gardening, is a huge thing.
So I have two different questions, see, from the audience. One of them, if you have a magical wand, what would you do? What will be some of the changes you will make to overcome the barriers for underrepresented women in research or health research or medicine?
Oh my gosh, a magic wand. I don't think what I'm going to say would be politically correct. So I don't think I'm going to say my initial thought of what I would do, right? But, I certainly would normalize, having women speak up more, and normalize women feeling comfortable, cutting off males who try to cut them off, and I'm saying this from personal experience, and just normalize seeing women in power, that is not something that we're always like, oh my gosh, a woman got that position, right? That is just something that we normalize and we see all the time. Yeah, there's a lot more that just would not be appropriate for me to.
That's good. Okay. Now, the other question is, what were the major challenges you faced in getting your program of research off the ground? And how did you overcome those challenges?
Yeah, I mean, so initially, like I said, like just developing those relationships, and the geographical challenges of going back and forth to the communities that I really wanted to be working in. What I decided when I realized I could not do the work that I wanted to do, the community-based, minority research, the way that I wanted to, shifting the focus to poverty, I think was the one major way that I overcame that barrier. I think using more existing secondary data, these large data sets, was another way to overcome that particular challenge as well. But in terms of getting my research off the ground, honestly, it was probably about 10 years of submitting the same set of grants and, reworking it. I remember the one grant that I submitted during my postdoc period, I got it funded 10 years later, right? So this challenge of like, you think you have a good idea, you might need a few cycles of reviewers before they see that it's a good idea as well. And I could have just put it away after the first rejection. But I knew it was a great idea and kept reworking it until I got it funded. I feel like that is a major challenge in our field, where we have to wait so long to get any feedback, and then the feedback is always so damning. I hate to use that term, but it's so hard to get negative feedback that, this also has to be, you have to have a spine to do the work that we do, right? That you can deal with rejection and move on. But really, that first grant that I got, and there was another one a little sooner, that helped me really find the funding to get my research off the ground. So sadly, but the reality is, like, funding really is everything, right?
Well, the person just saying that just made her day. Thank you.
Okay, well, good.
I think one of you're right. I think that's a good point to know, because I think now more than ever that we are a research one institution with the expectations are so high when it comes to especially early faculty members early in their career, where there's so much expectations of grants and funding in order to do the research. And you're right, you make a good point. Sometimes it's challenging just to get that grant the first time, the second time, the third time submissions. And for some people, they might just give up. They just like, I'm not doing it. I mean, this is not working. And I just move to something else. It's easier because, the whole idea, if I don't publish, I perish. Therefore, and if I don't get the grant, I can publish. But if I don't publish, I'm not going to make it. So so it's good to know that, at least in your case, it might take, sometime up to 10 years to get that one grant that you wanted to get. But there's some hope out there that you might still be successful if you keep persisting in those ideas.
I'll also say, so this is a shout out to like institutes like the CTSI, SSRI, so Clinical and Translational Science Institute, the Social Science Research Institute, and seed grant programs. A lot of the work that I did, in that 10-year period, whether it was a seed grant that got me a paper that was introductory or pilot data for a grant. I truly say, like, even $4,000 goes a long way, right? For us to do this work in Harrisburg this summer, it was probably under $2,000 to build this really strong partnership, right? So there is value in these smaller internal grants. And we always say that grants beget grants, right? So I think there, like, if you see this big, huge grant, right, that you want to pursue, just know that there are smaller ones that can help you, along the way. Sometimes, like, it was really too big for me to apply for in the postdoc to get this $4 million grant, right? I wouldn't have even had the wherewithal to manage that grant. It took me 10 years to build the staff and the expertise to then run that successfully 10 years later. So I don't know. I'm a huge believer in, everything happens the way it's supposed to happen. It just wasn't my time in my postdoc period.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think that's important to know that, building the small, I mean, there's a lot of good opportunities that sometimes people forget that they're, and we're like, oh, it's just $5,000. I'm not gonna apply, or it's just 10,000. I'm not gonna waste my time applying for just $5,000. But you're right, those $5,000 maybe is enough. It's enough just to get you started, to get you whatever data you need to write that one paper is going to lead you to the next paper and the next grant and so on. So I think sometimes people forget that, what we have available in our disposal is through some CTSI or SSRI or some of the other programs out there that the university provides, the SIG grants, that people should really consider those. I think I'm just like you. I use a lot of those small grants over my career, and even only one paper. And sometimes a lot of the research they did, it wasn't so much about the money, it was about the support behind the money. It's who else was supporting you, whether it was your chair of the department or somebody else, program coordinator or somebody else that said, hey, I will give you some time just to work on that, or I'll give you something else, whatever research you need. It might not be money, but it might be some other resources that you might need to be able to achieve that, research project that you're working on in order to get you to the next step. So sometimes we forget those small little steps that we can take to get there.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yep.
Do we have any other questions from the audience? I don't see any other questions. Anything else that you want to say as we conclude this talk? We're almost at the top of the hour. So anything else that you want to leave the audience with? Anything that you want to share with?
No, I mean, I want to thank you for the space that you've created. I love amplifying Lion Voices. I think the idea of highlighting and bringing diverse faculty and staff out of the corners, is huge. So in a sense, you are helping to kind of reduce some of these challenges that I raised in terms of seeing people who look like me. And now I know I know a few of them, a few more that I didn't know before because of Amplifying Lion Voices. So just, yeah, I appreciate the space and this effort.
And I think you make a good point. We have one of your colleagues on the Health Human Development a couple of months back. He's in Human Development Family Studies. Oh, now his name just came from my mind right now. But Alexis, yeah. And when we had a high conversation with him, he said, wow, I waited for a long time to meet somebody like you, and I didn't quite get it right away. But it's the idea of, there's a lot of us out there that do research in different spaces, different time, but unless we come together in this type of space, or we come together in some other type of meeting or something, sometimes we forget. The university is so big, we forget there's a lot of us out there. And when I'm talking, I was thinking about, a lot of diverse faculty members who do a lot of work with their underrepresented communities, who do a lot of different type of work, whether it's in the community or in the college setting or whatever, but working with this area, that we forget that we are out there, that we're doing this work. And we don't, unless we talk about it, we don't see the connections, we don't see each other. And I think it's important to have this avenue to hopefully provide that space for people to say, hey, it's not just me, it's other people. And I think that's one of the reasons we're doing this, just not only to amplify that voice, to amplify that whatever the person wants to share with, whatever the person wants to talk about, to give that opportunity, which so many times is not given because it's not, it's not a research. You have to talk about your research paper. Well, it's more than just that. The person is more than just the latest research paper they publish. It's a whole history behind who they are as a professional, who they are as a person, and how that impact the work they do as part of Penn State University. So I want to thank you again for all your time that you give us today and being here and share some of your story. And we are providing a little quick poll for those people in the audience. It's just a simple question. Please click on it, agree to strongly disagree, and we will share that with Lori later on. Also, this will be there will be a survey that is sent out to give us more information. Jennifer just put the link on the chat. Please put that out there. So we really would like your feedback as we continue to do this work. We have already identified 2 more people, one later this semester, one for the early in the spring, and we're looking for somebody later in the spring semester. So if you have any names on anybody you want to recommend, please send that to me. We will follow up with those individuals, so we make sure that we have different voices represented in these conversations. Somebody say, it reminded that there's much needed research to be done in populations that are unseen, and those experiences that are not representing much research that is done. And I think that's important. That's something really important. And again, is as you say, you're more into community engagement. You shift a little bit. Who knows what the next switch you're going to do in the next 5 or so years, because you might find there's another group out there that it hasn't been seen as we see sometimes.
Yeah, true. Very true. But again, thank you so much for the opportunity. I think also hearing other people's challenges, I don't want to say misery loves company, but it is nice to know that you're not the only one who, is facing some of these challenges. But yeah, hopefully we come up with the solutions too.
If you read the comments, somebody said, thank you for your sharing your parent story and with us and the positive energy. Definitely you have energy. That's something I would say with Lori. And no matter when I see her, where I see her, she's always like ready to go and full of energy.
I can say the same about you. I love running into you because you always have energy. And I think, maybe we like to share gossip here and there every once in a while too, which is
that's true. That's a different conversation.
A different
Anyway, thank you again for everyone. That will conclude our Amplifying Lion Voices for this month. Now, hopefully we'll see you in a couple of months from now. Thank you again for participating.
Thanks, everyone.